Coming in at number 5, Cyclops. I mean, we can't have a giant creature list without including one of the most infamous giants in history, Cyclops. Hailing from Greek mythology and then later Roman mythology, the Cyclops were giant one-eyed creatures who can be distinguished in 3 groups. In Hesiod's theogony, they're the brothers Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, I think, who provided Zeus with his weapon, the thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, they are an uncivilized group of shepherds, the brethren of Polyphemus encountered by Odysseus. Cyclopses were also famous as the builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tyrannus. For the sake of avoiding confusion, let's focus our attention to the Homeric Cyclopses. In an episode of Homer's Odyssey, the hero Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, a one-eyed man-eating giant who lives with his fellow Cyclopses in a distant land. They live in the world of men rather than among the gods. Homeric Cyclopses are presented as uncivilized shepherds, savages, and have no regard for Zeus. They live solitary lives and have no government. They are said to be inhospitable to strangers, slaughtering and eating all who come to their land. Coming in at number 4, Corb or the Fomorians. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish mythology, often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from under the sea or the earth. However, later they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders and enemies of Ireland's first settlers. They appear to have once been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. In Old and Middle Irish, the race is typically called the Fomor or Fomori, with an individual member being called a Fomor. They are often regarded as malevolent spirits dwelling underwater and in the nether regions of the earth, before later being portrayed as the aforementioned sea raiders. This was heavily influenced by the Viking raids on Ireland that were taking place during this time. Oftentimes they were depicted as having the body of a man and the head of a goat, and according to an 11th century book, they are said to have one eye, one arm, and one leg.
Coming in number 3, we've got the Knocker. You would think that mining is scary enough as is, right? Heading into underground tunnels to blast away at rocks until you find some useful materials, hopefully not getting caved in, probably not running out of oxygen, etc. Well, this dangerous career comes with its own share of folklore too, just to make sure that some unexplainable spooks become even spookier. The Knocker is a mining monster. Based on the sounds of underground work, it is a spirit that lives within the same tunnels that the helmet-wearing workers descend into every day. Apparently the Knocker is the ghost of a tin miner. It's 2 feet tall with a big head, long beard, and arms that almost drag along the ground. Being the ghost of a miner, it carries all the necessary equipment from lamps to pickaxes. Folks familiar with mining might know about the knocking sounds that echo throughout. This is a very scary sound as it can often be indicative of a cave-in. The actual knocking came from the creaking of earth and timbers before giving way, but to some of the miners the noise came from these malevolent spirits attempting to knock down the walls. There are actually all sorts of Knocker related tales ranging from benevolent to malevolent, but sometimes remaining largely benign. But the scariest additions are those who went around the different tunnels stealing equipment and food, leaving the miners in terrible situations. Sometimes they would even purposefully misdirect miners, leaving them lost in the labyrinth of mine shafts and passages. Worst of all, they're associated with mine fires, which are absolutely horrifying. So make sure you toss the last bite of your meat pie into the mine for the Knockers, lest you find yourself in a whole world of trouble. Coming in at number 2, we've got boggarts. Nasty, nasty creatures these ones are. A lot of folks are familiar with them thanks to the Harry Potter universe, but the idea of rotten little buggers ruining everything has been around for a lot longer than that. Household spirits looking to cause as much trouble as possible, boggarts are something nobody ever wants to deal with. They're famous for making possessions disappear, causing milk to sour, and having dogs walk lame. Definitely not fun. And once you've found yourself in the upsetting company of one, good luck getting rid of it. They will stick with your family no matter where you go, no matter how far you run. Your things will keep disappearing, your food will keep going bad, and you'll always be haunted by the knowledge that an awful little shit is making all of it happening. But don't even think about reasoning with a boggart. Sure, they were once helpful brownies or silkies, but something offended them or caused them to feel mistreated, and now they are just pure bad. Even if you offer to make a deal or treat it nicely from now on, it will respond very negatively. It will get furious and wreck all of your stuff in one go instead of doing it mischievously over the course of many years. So yeah, it's like a poltergeist you can't escape, but somehow worse. Folks that have to deal with these, not happy folks. And finally at number 1, we've got Black Shuck. We've talked about fairy dogs earlier, but that was just the beginning. This is the true terror dog, the big, brutal bad boy, the canine carnivore fueled by carnage, a hate-eyed and vengeful black dog full of rage and malice. There are all sorts of variants based on where you are, from the Gargess to the Guy Trash to the Padfoot, but the best known is Black Shuck. See it and you are out of luck. This thing is the embodiment of Satan. Wherever it goes, destruction follows. A harbinger of doom with blazing red eyes. If you see one, you are supposed to hide or make sure not to look at it. If you neglect to avert your gaze, your luck will get so bad that you die within the year. Holy smokes, right? There's one tale from a Suffolk church that tells of a Black Shuck visit during 1577. The enormous dog came running in, killed a man and a boy, and caused the steeple to collapse through the roof. It then left in a hurry, leaving dark scorch marks on the door. And that was just one little tale. Even if you're a dog person, you do not want to run into one of these. Something tells me that a treat won't smooth things over.
Number 5. The Rolling Rock. To say Nagahi, otherwise known as the Traveling Stone or the Rolling Rock, was the result of his mother using a stone for relief. He was an enormous round boulder that would wait for members of the tribe to come by before hurling itself at them. If it saw someone in the distance, it would chase them in a relentless pursuit, not stopping until it had run them over, crushed them, and killed them. Nyanezgani knew about the Rolling Rock's tactics and used his mystical colored knives to stack the odds in his favor. As he approached the rock's lair, he planted his black knives in the ground. As he got closer, he planted his blue knives and his yellow ones in the intervals during his approach. When the Traveling Stone saw the hero, he took off after him, hoping to crush and kill him. As it rolled over the knives, slivers of itself were sheared off, with each different fragment becoming a new pigment. The stone from its bones became white rock, its flesh blue pigment, its hair black, its blood red, and yellow ochre coming from its intestines. Nyanezgani used his lightning arrows, which were a gift from the sun god, to chase the Rolling Rock all the way to the San Juan River, taking off pieces as he went, making the rock unrecognizable. The creature begged for mercy and promised to remain in the rivers where it would keep the mountain springs open so that the Dene could have fresh water. Nyanezgani agreed, and the stone took on the form of an otter with buffalo horns, known as the Water Monster, who was a well-loved and friendly creature from that point on. Number 4. The Evil Eyes. The B'nai Ahani were the result of their mother's unnatural practice with a cactus, which may be the scariest thing on this entire list. They were limbless, round creatures with a tapering end who stayed in the location where they were abandoned by their terrified mother. You know, because of the lack of limbs. They had depressions in their heads that looked like eyes, but they were the definition of if looks could kill, as they could shoot lightning out of them to shock and kill their prey. They used Magpie as their spy, and together the two creatures had offspring of a similar make and disposition. Nyanezgani prepared for battle with the B'nai by bringing his armor and a large bag of salt. He found the twins and their offspring and was attacked. They tried to hit him with their lightning, but the hero's armor deflected it. He threw the salt in a fire, and the resulting sparks blinded the creatures, allowing him to attack. In some versions he killed the creatures, and in others he transformed them into cacti, but he spared two of the children. He decided to make them useful to his people, and turned one into a screech owl whose job it was to warn the Dene of future events and imminent dangers. He transformed the other into a whippoorwill in order to make things more beautiful and the earth more happy.
And coming in at number 3, we have the Genginger. Making its origins in Norway and Denmark, there have been many different depictions of the Genginger, of course. Always so many depictions. The most popular being that of a spirit or ghost of the recently deceased. Now, that just sounds like any ghost in general, right? But what makes the Genginger stand out is that its name translates to against or towards, and also a footwalker. So the name itself also implies to walking after death. People who committed suicide were usually the ones who came back as a Genginger. Or perhaps before they passed away there was something else that they had to do in order to be at peace, so they went back to do that. Whatever the case may be, the Genginger usually needs assistance from somebody in the living world. Now that's where things get a bit spookier. See, in Scandinavian tradition, the Genginger isn't a malicious or evil entity, just a spirit that comes back to say, what's up, you know, how you guys doing? How's dinner? Are you still cooking? Nah, awesome, when it disappears. Whereas other traditions, it's like a violent thing. You know, you didn't want a loved one coming back in this form. It was malicious. Relatives actually went the extra mile to make sure that your grave was properly sealed to avoid this, or else you would get the dead man's pinch. Now the dead man's pinch, no, it's not a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and it sounds pretty scary, but you don't want to be on the receiving end of the dead man's pinch. It happens when you're asleep, because when you wake up, your skin would be blue and sunken, you know? Usually being attacked in your sleep means that you shouldn't be resting near a certain area. So maybe you're too close to a graveyard or too close to like these mountains. I mean, just throw a sign up, that works too. You don't have to pinch or bite any of us. So this undead zombie vampire combo would also break into your homes to spread disease. How fun. 6 feet apart, guys, come on, read the thing. Wear masks, space out. The tradition of the Genginger traces back to the early Viking ages as well, believe it or not. They're present in many of the Icelandic sagas, such as the saga of Eric the Red, taking the form of a mortal creature, and then Grendir is also said to have slayed the Genginger with his sword. Cool, it's always fun when you slay one of those. And number 2, the Liko. Heading over to explore some Slavic folklore where the Liko is otherwise known as the embodiment of all evil and misfortune. Now, if that doesn't sound horrible enough, their appearance is sure to get you. She's described as being an old lady dressed in all black, but she has one eye that peers out. And it's haunting looking, very. It's also known as a male that resembles a goblin, so either way, they're both not that fun. My personal favorite tale of the Liko is that some said it's taller than trees, like it's a Cyclops almost, which is great. So what's the point of the Liko? Why the late night strolls bestowing bad fortune? Well, the Liko, and I'll keep saying Liko because I can't read, the Liko is known to be the servant of death. So during pre-Christian times, villages would conduct these rituals during times of epidemic, and a female-like idol would be built to be used as kindle to ignite a sacrificial fire. They thought, hey, if we destroy a version of it in the fire, then the epidemic would be dispelled. Then, of course, later on, it was linked to bad luck and death. The Liko is said to stalk its victims by perching on a fence or in a tree, just watching you from afar. And in many fairy tales, it's said that the Liko would jump onto your back and have its hands on you so tightly that even if you flailed around, it wouldn't let go. And while it was biting your neck, people would try and run into a body of water, hoping that it would drown, or at least let go. I mean, come on. And that wasn't the case. This was often the cause of their untimely death. See, the Liko doesn't cause their victim to drown, but death is usually the result of the victim trying to get rid of it. So it makes it look like it's your fault in a way. There is a tale of a blacksmith who encountered the Liko and made a pretty wild deal. So as the Liko was preparing to eat the blacksmith, he offers to craft anything the creature wants. So, of course, she asks for another eye, a new eye. The blacksmith insisted that the Liko be strapped down during this, because if she moved while the eye was being hammered in, it just wouldn't work out, right? It would make it worse, if anything. So once she was strapped down, the blacksmith took a red-hot poker and jabbed her other eye out. That's crazy. That's like some Bruce Willis stuff right there. The blacksmith escaped by pretending to be a sheep, so the Liko didn't notice him when all the sheep had left the shed. Gotta love those handy sheepskin coats laying around. And coming in at number 1, Fear-Liath, the big gray man, and no, I don't mean Gandalf. Also known as Fear-Liath more, this one comes from Scottish mythology, and it's probably one that you've heard of in one way or another. It's known as a possible guardian of another dimension. Coming in at superhuman size, its dreadful presence can cause suicidal thoughts. The big gray man of Ben Macdui is said to be a distant cousin or somehow related to Bigfoot. That's why they look so big and hairy and similar. As they share similar appearances, of course, the mountain Ben Macdu is home to this fantastic beast that you don't want to find. Many glimpses of the Fear-Liath have been stated that it's blurry, kind of like how all the photo evidence we have of Bigfoot is blurry itself. Many believe the cameras simply just weren't good enough to capture a clear image, but the blurry feature is said to be part of its ghostly nature. See, it's this tall, sinister, blurry gray creature. Science argues the existence of the Fear-Liath, saying that the appearances of the creature are simply an illusion caused by atmospheric conditions atop high mountains, where the shadows of somebody can be cast far away and look like this large giant phantom. So this ape creature has also been beloved to the missing link in our evolution. People think this is like the half man, half ape right in the middle thing. What do you guys think? The shadow of death itself, or just the shadow of Fred the mountain hiker? Which one? One of the common feelings you get when being in the presence of Fear-Liath is dread and panic. Now, many believe that this happens when you're climbing a mountain and there's not enough oxygen getting to your brain. That plus the anxieties of being on a mountain thousands of feet in the air, your brain will play tricks on you. But some tales are too convincing. One of the earliest sightings took place back in 1890 by John Norman Collie, a respected scientist and explorer who was walking in cairngorms, and a heavy mist appeared as he arrived atop of Ben Macdui Mountain. This fog reduced his visibility, and he didn't talk about his experience for 35 years. That's a long time to keep a secret. That's wild. He heard footsteps behind him crunching that didn't match his own walking pace. And then he described this creature that he saw. It was large with broad shoulders, over 10 feet tall, with long waving arms. He also said it had an olive-like complexion, or rather covered in short brown hair. But in majority of these cases, the creature is only heard or sensed. So if you're thinking of grabbing a Polaroid and hitting the slopes, you won't be too lucky.
Number 5 on this list is the Joragumo. So before we get too deep into this entry, I want to start off by saying that I hate spiders. As a kid, they were my worst fear, and I just had like zero love for them at all. And that's what makes the Joragumo especially terrifying to me. Joragumo, or terrifying demon creatures who resemble large, dangerous spiders. They have the ability to shapeshift though, and can sometimes appear as beautiful women. Gajinpo says, translated to English, Joragumo means woman spider. However, the kanji can also mean entangling bride or whore spider. They are cunning and appear as seductive young women. They feed on young men who fall for their tricks, trapping them in their webs and devouring them slowly. There are several stories based on the Joragumo. In Tonogusa, a young warrior encounters a beautiful woman. Realizing she's a yokai, he strikes her with his sword and she flees to the attic. There, they find a dead spider about 30 centimeters long and surrounded by decaying bodies. In Izu, Joran Falls is home to a Joragumo. The legend says a woodcutter encountered the spider when she tried to drag him behind the waterfall. He escaped, warning the village to stay away, but an outsider met the Joragumo. Surprisingly, she let him live as long as he never spoke of it. Unfortunately, the man was the opposite of coy. The story diverges from there, but most virgins end with him entangled in spiderweb and wishing he'd kept his mouth shut. So not only am I not a fan of spiders, but I'm also a young man, literally the exact food that this beast is determined that they like. Also, how the heck am I supposed to know if this nice pretty lady just wants to go out for coffee with me or put me in her web and eat me? The legend is thought to make people question their choice in partners more, but if it's actually true, then be very careful of the Joragumo. Number 4 on this list is the Nurikabe. Nurikabe is super interesting and very different from a lot of other entries that we have on this list. I suppose that's because, in all honesty, these Nurikabe are a bit more derpy than they are scary. However, if you underestimate them or don't treat them as a threat, then that's where you're going to run into problems. The name Nurikabe translates to plaster wall, and that's a very good description of what these creatures actually are. These creatures are said to manifest as a big wall that blocks the way of travelers. An invisible obstacle that will appear to foreigners and send them in weird directions. They're so tall that you can't climb over them, and you won't be able to go around them. You'll be forced to change your direction. This is the extent to what the Nurikabe will do. They aren't gonna hunt you down and kill you. They're not gonna cause natural disasters or curse you or anything like that. They'll just block your path. And even though this doesn't seem like a big deal, well, it kind of is. The amount of stories that people have had about getting dangerously lost out in the middle of nowhere due to these things is insane. These are just the stories that actually get back to the public too, because a lot of times people never make it back to society. These wall creatures prey on those unfamiliar with the area, so you'll naturally completely lose your bearings if you need to go around them. These days, Nurikabe aren't super menacing because we live in a world with cell phones and a GPS, but back when we didn't have such things, these were extremely dangerous. Locals would always warn people before they went on journeys to be careful of the Nurikabe and always keep track of where they'd been. A mischievous plaster wall who back in the day took quite a few lives.
Next up at number 3, the Queerhonuk. And on the same theme as the Darugdua, there is perhaps no other female figure of folklore that is more terrifying than the legendary Queerhonuk. And this one, instead of drawing upon the tragic image of the forsaken daughter turned ravenous blood-drinking vampire, this one instead takes the visage of the mother. And not just any archetypal mother. No. Oh no. But instead, the mother of the devil himself, the fire spitter, the mother of all demons, and one of the greatest adversaries in the whole of Irish mythology. As the legend goes, when the planet was nothing but a swirling mass of vapour, water and rock, Cuireadh was hatched deep in the molten core of the planet. There for eons upon eons she waited, patiently biding her time before we humans stepped into existence. You see, the fire spitter needed food for her children to feast upon, and guess what? We were that food. And in the early days of humanity, the mother of demons and her children feasted upon us in a frenzy. However, there is one turning point of this legend where something remarkable happened, and believe it or not, but the legend of Cuireadh is actually inexplicably tied to the patron saint of Ireland himself, Patrick. Well, he went by Patricius back then, but still. Strangely enough, when the legend of St. Patrick is attributed to his removal of all of the snakes from Ireland in some folkloric canons, those very same snakes are instead the fire spitter and her children. As the legend goes, Patrick had traced Cuireadh's home back to the cave on Station Island, which also allegedly served as a portal to hell. There they battled for 2 days and 2 nights before the fire spitter retreated through the swamps and poisoned all of the wells on her way. Eventually the pair fought in a great lake where the mother of demons swallowed St. Patrick whole as they both sank into the cold, shadowy darkness of Loch Derg. Thankfully for him though, St. Patrick tore his way out of her belly and she was banished to the dark, miserable depths for eternity. Thank you very much, St. Patrick. Coming in at number 2, the Changeling. Because we can't really talk about Celtic folklore without describing some of the most prolific entities in the mythos of both Celtic and European culture. The Fae, fairies. In Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann and the Ail Shee, the people of the mounds, and a race of mythical and mystical entities that have since established themselves in playing some of the most important roles in Celtic folklore. In Irish and Scottish mythology specifically, the Tuatha De Danann were considered to be the people of the goddess Danu, the mother goddess, and later they eventually evolved into a far more supernatural design. It is said that the fairies of Celtic folklore could bestow great blessings and equally dangerous curses, and perhaps one of the most terrifying examples of that is with the Changeling, a fairy child left behind in place of a stolen human child. Now, although the theme itself has been used to explain away many unexplained afflictions, diseases and disorders of the time, the cultural significance of the Changeling, particularly in horror literature and cinema, has been pretty staggering. You see, it plays on one key parental fear of a child becoming uncanny, a split double of their former self. A changeling is typically identified by a number of unusual traits. In Irish legend, a fairy child may appear sickly or will cease to grow in size like a normal child would. In many folklore legends, these changelings grow notable physical characteristics. They may grow a beard or grow long in the tooth, literally. Quickly they may display an intelligence that is far beyond their years, as well as develop the power of foresight. They will know things that should be outside of their knowledge, harnessed by the power of the Ail Shee. In some very rare cases, it was the very elderly of a fairy that was replaced as a changeling, so that the old fairy could instead live in comfort, being coddled by its human parents without them ever knowing. In folk legend, protecting oneself from a changeling was of the utmost importance, and simple charms such as an inverted coat or open iron scissors left where the child slept were required to ward them off. Beware the changeling, that's all I can say. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Balor. And truth be told, we can't really have any other creation of folklore as our number 1 spot. Balor, the big bad baddie of Celtic mythology, is a figure that features most proficiently in the mythos of Irish and Scottish folklore. Whereas on the one hand we have the mythical Tuatha De Danann, on the other we have the Fomorians, a supernatural race of monstrosities who shamble their way from the bowels of the earth to wreak havoc on we humans and engage in an eternal battle with the Fae. In Celtic mythology, this guy is the tyrant leader of them all. He is often described as a giant with one single large eye that wreaks destruction wherever it casts its gaze. Where have we heard that one before? Perhaps derived from the common Celtic word Balaros, meaning the deadly one, Balor is the be-all and end-all of destruction and devastation in the ancient history of the British Isles. Believed to be the personification of blight and drought, it was written in prophecy that Balor would eventually be slain by his own grandson, Lug, who would become the storm god of Celtic mythology and bring an end to the suffering that Balor wrought. From his fortress on Tory Island, in many myths and legends, Balor is described as a giant eye at the top of a tower tower that when opened carves a path of destruction in its wake. As many legends tell it, once open, it could destroy entire armies with a single glance. Although in many other instances Balor is a humanoid figure that walks beside men, as some folklorists described, he had a single eye in his forehead, a venomous fiery eye. There were always 7 coverings over this eye, and one by one Balor removed them. With the first, the bracken began to wither. With the second, the grass became copper coloured. With the third, the woods and the timber began to heat. With the fourth, smoke came from the trees. With the fifth, everything grew red. With the sixth, it sparked. And with the seventh, they were all set on fire and the whole countryside was ablaze. You see, whichever way you spin it, Balor was the personification of pretty much all evil in Celtic mythology and folklore, and when it comes to big bad baddies, yeah, they don't get much nastier than this guy.
Coming in number 5, we've got the Rat Men of Southend. Who could forget Dear Rat Boy, am I right? Well, if you forgot him before, prepare to have some imagery burned into your brain for life. There are actually a couple of tales referring to a rat man from Southend, so why not talk about both? The first is a little more fun and a little less tragic. Tragic nonetheless, but more juicy details and less cold-blooded murder. So according to some, at one point, the mayor of Southend was indeed a rat bastard. Not literally, but in the way that he constantly and unrepentantly cheated on his wife. Poor woman, although she did choose to marry a politician. So as divine punishment for this mayor's consistent adultery, his son was born with a rat face and a long tail. This did not sit well with the social climbing couple, but what could they do? For a while they would feed their son the only thing he craved: meat. This rat boy would chow down on raw flesh like nobody else. Eventually they realized they couldn't possibly raise a meat-eating rat lad in full view of the public, so the mayor had an underpass with secret chambers built just for his rat son. And for the rest of his days, Rat Boy lived in the dank, dark underpass, attempting escape and scaring anyone who dared pass through. He eventually grew into a rat man in his own right, and even killed a few folks for food. The legend persists, with some night tours insisting that they stroll the underpass in case he decides to come out at night. Yeesh. The second story has more to do with the man and also rats, but I'll tell it anyway. Apparently there was an old man also living below an underpass. He had no belongings save for his clothes and a blanket, and he did his best to stay hidden away. However, one day a group of rowdy teenagers came across this man and mercilessly beat him. Once he was incapacitated, they stole his blanket and left him to die in the cold. Unable to move due to his injuries, the man eventually did succumb to hypothermia. Following his death, hundreds of rats emerged from the shadows to consume his lifeless body. Thus began the legend of the Rat Man, consumed by the scurrying dark masses that plague the city. Some say that you can still hear strange scrabbly noises near that underpass. Could it be the descendants of those rats looking for more human flesh? Or maybe it's the ghost of the Rat Man himself, crawling around, disemboweled and confused. Coming in number 4, we've got fairy dogs. Doesn't that just sound lovely? Like a little Dachshund puppy with little Tinkerbell wings? Well, that is not what these fairies are like. Of course, the fairies that folks see in Disney movies are much friendlier than the ones from folklore. Fairies of legend are often mischievous, looking to cause trouble in best case scenarios and trying to ruin people in harsher cases. So it stands to reason that fairy dogs might not be so sociable. No belly rubs or ear scratches will make these fearsome canines friendly. See, there's an idea out there that crossroads are the door to another world. If you make the wrong choice or linger too long, you might find yourself staring down a fairy, a demon, or a god. Not necessarily what the average person wants, you know? These otherworldly beings usually live their lives unseen and unsensed by us, but at crossroads their actions might become more apparent. Some crossroads might even feature a fairy dog or two. These four-legged fiends guard the entrance. They're known for glowing bright green, making sure you don't mistake them for a regular dog. And if you see one, it's best to turn around. They'll bark twice as a warning. Alright, 2, remember that. And don't worry if you think you might miss one of these barks, they're as loud and commanding as they come. But if you do not heed this warning and the dog gets out a third bark, you are doomed. Sure, good things come in threes, just not this time. Hey guys, if you're liking the video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up, it really helps us with the algorithm. On with the list.
Number 3 on this list is La Ciguepa. La Ciguepa are interesting mythical creatures that are located in the Dominican Republic. They can be found in forests and around the rivers and lakes of the country. At first glance, they may look like a woman with long hair. However, upon closer inspection, one will see very unique characteristics. Their backwards facing feet. That's right guys, their feet actually face towards their own body, and this is one of the main differences between this creature and your standard human. Many people haven't paid close enough attention to this detail, and because of that have been tricked into thinking that this is an actual woman. A fatal mistake if one of these things decides that you'd make for some good prey. The typical typical target of this creature are men that find themselves exploring the forest. These creatures are said to be incredibly smart and can often outwit the people that they run into. Also, rather surprisingly, their backwards feet make them run very fast, so even if you do catch on to this creature's intentions, running away would be very hard to do. The earliest mention of this creature was back in 1866, and since then there have been many stories written about these creatures. Those lucky enough to have an interaction and then make it out alive have documented their findings and tried to warn others from wandering into the forests unarmed. Sadly, these warnings aren't always heeded, and many men have disappeared over the years, never to be heard of again. Trekking through the lush forests of the Dominican Republic is already dangerous as is and requires lots of planning. Just don't forget to also plan for the La Ciguepa if you do find yourself in this country. Number 2 on this list is the Yakumama. Ever seen the movie Anaconda? 1997 movie with J-Lo and Owen Wilson, all about a super massive snake that starts hunting this filmmaker? Well, I wouldn't be shocked if that snake was based off of the legend of the Yakumama. Cryptid Wiki says the Yakumama is a large snake up to 60 meters in length that is said to inhabit the Amazon River basin. Local shamans say that the Yakumama travels to an area called the Boiling River. In the local legends, the Yakumama is said to be the mother of all marine life. It has the ability to suck up any living thing that passed within 100 paces. The locals would blow on a conch horn before entering the river, believing after hearing the noise, the serpent would reveal itself if it was in the area. I can't describe to you guys how massive 60 meters in length would actually be. Titanoboa was an ancient creature that actually existed in the Amazon. It was a massive snake, the biggest the world has ever seen, that ruled over these parts and could swallow crocodiles whole. That creature at its max would grow up to 50 feet in length or 15 meters. So basically, Yakumama is 4 times the size of the biggest and deadliest snake that's ever lived. This thing would be able to annihilate hundreds of humans at once. Even if the locals did blow on their conch and the snake did reveal itself, then there would literally be nothing that they could do. It would just eat them all, and that would be that. Snakes are super cool, but not when they're 60 meters long and looking to devour me. Number 1 on this list is the Peuchen. Peuchen are very dangerous and deadly beasts and should not be underestimated under any circumstances. Cryptid Wiki says, the Peuchen, a creature from the Mapuche mythology and Chilote mythology pertaining to southern Chile, was a feared shapeshifter which could instantly change into anything. It's often been described as a gigantic flying snake that produced strange whistling sounds, while its gaze could paralyze an intended victim and permit it to suck its blood. It's often been reported as sucking blood from sheep. The creature can be eliminated by a maki. So maki, in case you aren't familiar, are medicine women, and they're believed to be the only people capable of defeating this beast. Meaning that you could be the strongest warrior in the world, you could have taken down beasts and enemies in the hundreds before, but you would still fall to the Peuchen if you weren't a maki. It's extremely hard to kill something if you can't even look at it, and that's what this is like. Similar to Medusa in the way that it can paralyze you if you look at it, fighting this beast is near impossible. Aside from its ability to paralyze people, it's also extremely fast, extremely strong, it can fly, and it can also shapeshift into other dangerous creatures. Pray that you never run into this creature, because it will assuredly be the last thing that you ever do.
Alright, kicking off the list at number 5, we have Banshee, the Irish Banshee. Scream like a banshee, there's a line you've probably heard in movies or songs, but what the hell is a banshee anyways? I've never been to a zoo and then seen a banshee before. It's not something I've done. It's actually a reference to the woman of the fairies. Irish folklore says that if you hear this woman scream, that means a family member is going to die. What a harsh and gruesome warning. The Irish Banshee is said to live in the forest, but she still is connected to you. Okay, so the scream, her scream, can be heard from very far away. So yeah, it's a warning, a terrifying warning that's pretty loud. You're not gonna miss it. It's said that each family has their own banshee, which is the interesting part. She has a different appearance for each family, so there's not one specific look for her. I mean, some accounts report her to be super tall and lanky, like moi, where other reports have been between, 1 to 4 feet. And the wardrobe, super fitting for the tale. She sometimes rocks the gray cloak over the green dress, and other times she goes out in all white with the red hair. She will warn you of a death by screaming. This is important. But most of the time, it's said that she only appears with the descendants of the pure Milesian stock of Ireland. So surnames that prefix with O and Mac. What about MC? Is that close enough? Like Mick, Mac, O? Am I cool? Am I good? Like in X-Men First Class, the movie, we see one of the main characters named Banshee, and their powers are screaming really loud. So even in our popular culture today, this legend has still managed to stay afloat. What about you guys? Does anybody out there have their own Banshee that they want to talk about or share stories? Is your last name dangerously close to it like mine, McWaters? Let us know down below. And before we continue with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please give us a spooky thumbs up because it helps us pay the bills for our electrical chairs in the basement here, you know? So thanks. Anyways, back to European folklore. Coming in at number 4, we have the basilisk. Originating from Europe and North Africa, the basilisk is a hybrid between a rooster and a lizard. How fun. It was born from an egg laid by a rooster and incubated by a toad. It's kind of like Jurassic Park, but you know, more fun, more terrifying, I don't know, depends. But it didn't always take that shape exactly. So early accounts of the basilisk say that it started off as a small crowned snake and would simply kill by using its poison and evil gaze. Of course, you can't forget the gaze. And it even leaves a trail of venom, as if that wasn't enough. So you know where not to go, rather. In Christian mythology, the basilisk represents hell, yet some places it represents power. Like it became the symbol of the Swiss city Basel. It's believed to be the most poisonous creature ever, and apparently once it was killed by a spear from somebody on a horse, and the venom was so strong that it flowed up through the spear and killed the man and the horse. Not the horse? Come on, guys. Even the herbs around it died because the air was tainted of poison. And if there's a well near it, that water becomes poisoned forever. I mean, there's nothing a little crystal light can't fix though, right? Sip water, you're like, no, this one's tainted for sure. And then it became known as this large hybrid creature with a loud roar.
Do the roar.
You know anything? How about one of those famous Shrek roars?
Do the roar.
And of course, it's known to breathe fire. Another common interpretation is that the basilisk from Harry Potter. So in Chamber of Secrets, we see Harry fight the basilisk, and it takes on the appearance of a very, very large snake. Greek mythology always has the coolest stuff. Damn. It also appeared in the 2016 film Gods of Egypt.
And how do you know they have a weak spot? I don't, but they must, right?
In a much less exciting cinematic way than Harry Potter, I'd say.
In at number 3 we have Koi Nahap Trong. The Koi Nahap Trong tend to possess the bodies of the recently deceased. Legend has it that when someone passes away and is prepared for burial, it is extremely important to not let a black cat, which is a symbol of bad luck, leap over the coffin. If that does happen, then the body of the deceased will be infested by evil spirits, which then turns into Koi Nahap Trong and chases the living. Other stories claim Koi Nahap Trong are spirits of the dead who prey on the frail, dying people, seeking to consume their souls and steal their bodies so they can indulge in earthly pleasures. Older victims are much easier to manipulate and possess, and they are close enough to death even when they do end up passing away. The Koi Nahap Trong stays in their bodies and can live on in that body, enjoy their life on earth. When it inhabits the elderly, they seem to appear reinvigorated but also start to act strangely. Some of the weird things these revived humans do are they ask for lots of food, and very specific foods to feed on, like raw blood and even living animals. These odd behaviors are mistaken for signs of recovery, which why Koi Nahap Trong can live among the living normally for a few days or even weeks before people start noticing the strange behavior. Obviously, this person is already dead and their body is taken over and possessed by this demon, and the only way for the Koi Nahap Trong to exit the body is by an exorcism, and then once the evil spirit is expelled, the body will immediately show signs of decay, as if it's been dead for days. Some believe that this legend is exaggerated accounts of the incidents where someone is wrongfully declared dead and wakes up suddenly during their funeral, which is terrifying. In at number 2, Malay. Malay is said to be one of the most terrifying creatures in the Vietnamese folklore. By daytime they are said to walk among us disguised as women, usually looking young, very beautiful, and often appearing tired. I'm always tired. At night, though, it's said that their heads detach from their bodies. They are seen dragging bloody organs alongside them and floats around to feast on flesh, organs, and other rancid items. It is also believed that someone whose excrement is consumed by a Malay is cursed with eternal hunger and will eventually die of starvation no matter how much they eat. When sunrise comes, they must return to their human body again, otherwise they'll be burned to death by the sunlight. So the easiest way to vanquish a Malay is to hide their desired body so that she can't reattach her head. Apparently, the Malay story originated originated from when a woman, believed to be cursed, engaged in various sins and fraudulent activities during her previous life. Then after she died, her sins caused her to be reborn as a horrific demon who lives off dead animals, their organs, excrement and garbage. There have been many different sightings throughout the 21st century, including strange red lights floating up and down a field in 2016, and then again in 2016 villagers saw strange green and red lights rising up and down in the distance, and people thought it was the Marley due to her glowing appearance when she floats through the night. There have also been videos and pictures seen all over social media believing to be the Marley, showing glowing figures hovering around the night sky and eyewitnesses capturing these sightings, and people have no explanation for them. Similar creatures as the Marley can be seen in the folklore of many other Southeast Asian countries including Malaysia, Thailand and Cambodia, where they are known as the other names such as Arp, Krasu or Penangel, but they all relate back to Marley. And finally in another one we have Than Trung. The Than Trung are evil spirits who torture the souls of the dead. These spirits usually appear as either massive black birds with blood red beaks, or they have massive bird-shaped heads with human-like bodies and glowing red eyes. They also have large wings which help them fly, and they stay close to cemeteries and sit on mountain peaks to have a better view to seek out their next prey, and are able to see who is being buried at each cemetery. They often appear after someone passes away and is newly buried, and they show up next to the new grave. It is said that they torture the newly dead people's souls for information about their living relatives, then the Than Trung hunts down their relatives and reap the souls of those living people, leading to several family members dying within a short period of one another. Apparently the Than Trung must get to the newly buried person within 49 days or they cannot summon their soul. There is even a horror game that came out called The Death Than Trung, which is based off the folklore and was created and developed by Dong Si T and some member of Team Dut in 2021. The game is a first-person psychological horror adventure game that is highly inspired by the demon folklore. The game revolves around the story of a young man who was stuck in an endless nightmare at his inn, and the black and red are the main color tones in the game. It takes place in the city of Hanoi in 2021 and heavily involves the Than Trung and their reign of terror.
Kicking off at number 5. The Questing Beast. And what better place to begin our folkloric journey than with the ultimate adversary of all things monster hunting in the long history of the British Isles, the Questing Beast. And yeah, whilst the name may be a dead giveaway, in folklore there is perhaps no other creature that is quite as bizarre as this one. Otherwise known as the Beglatistion or the Barking Beast, this particular creature is a key monster in Arthurian legend, and in the forgotten days of King Arthur's Britain, his Knights of the Round Table, most prominently Sir Palomides and Sir Percival, made it their quest to hunt this thing down. As the legend goes, this strange creature had the head and neck of a snake, the body of a leopard, the haunches of a lion, and the cloven feet of a hart. The name, primarily Beglatistion, comes from the great noise that it emits from its belly, a barking noise that allegedly sounded like 30 couple hounds questing. Bizarrely enough though, the legend of the Questing Beast is allegedly a variant of the mythological medieval view on giraffes. Do with that information as you will, but yeah, that's anyone's guess. Perhaps the most memorable appearance of the Questing Beast in Arthurian legend was in Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, where after he had an affair with his half-sister Morgan, they didn't know they were related at the time, just FYI, the Questing Beast appears to Arthur in a disturbing vision drinking from a clear and still pool. In that same dream, he sees a prophecy that foretells Mordred's destruction of Camelot, and he then intertwines the two. Later on, Merlin reveals to Arthur that the Questing Beast was actually born of a human woman, a princess who lusted after her own brother. Sound familiar? Well, in the legend told by Merlin, eventually the brother was sentenced to death by their own father and was torn to shreds by rabid dogs, the same sound that the Questing Beast made. Essentially, Arthur saw his own near downfall in a dream, and the Questing Beast was the result of that. Yeah, exactly. Star Wars ain't got nothing on this. Swinging in at number 4, the Darug Dua. As William Congreve wrote in his 1697 play The Morning Bride, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned. The Darug Dua is perhaps Ireland's most tragic and fearsome tale of that fact, one that is still whispered at grave sites and burials to this day. Surprisingly enough, in terms of horror, the Darug Dua is perhaps a lot more recognisable than we may have first imagined. In fact, loosely meaning red blood sucker, this terrifying visage of folklore horror is the closest that Celtic mythology has come to detailing the archetypal vampire. As the legend goes, thousands of years ago, she was a legendary beauty with blood-red lips and pale blonde hair, and her true name has since been lost to the ages, overshadowed by the folklore villain she became. As kind as she was beautiful, the Diag Dua was the envy of every clan in Ireland, and suitors lined up to win her hand in marriage. As fate would have it though, this sweet-natured girl fell in love with a local peasant, an equally handsome man who was kind and well-natured too, but alas, he was penniless. Eventually, the girl's father instead agreed for an old and violently cruel man to marry her, securing a fortune in the process. He kept her locked in a tower and had an affinity for making her bleed. Day after day, he tortured her, locked away in a tower cell, while she waited in vain for the kind peasant boy to somehow come and rescue her. That hope alone kept her alive for many months, but one day, when all hope was gone, she took her own life. As the legend tells it, the Darug Dua is buried in a small churchyard near Strongbow's Tree in the southeast of Ireland. But that wasn't the end of her. In death, she rose from the earth that same night she was buried, driven mad by the half-remembered visions of her own blood welling on her own skin, thirsty for revenge. As they tell it, every night the Darug Dua rises as the red blood drinker, hunting down young men in a blind and natural revenge. She calls to them in a strange, haunting siren song that lingers in their mind as they sleep, where they eventually follow her to a grave and she feasts on them. The Darug Dua is as tragic as it is violent, and it's a cautionary tale that leaves little to be desired.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the Alp. This creature originates in German folklore and can cause you all sorts of terrible problems. Some liken it to a vampire, others to demons like the incubus. It will visit people at night and sit on their bodies, although they don't usually attempt to initiate sexual acts like incubi and succubi. If the person doesn't wake up, the Alp will often hop into their dreams and control what they see. It's not common for them to give people good dreams either. Nope, it's nightmares end to end. One of the many sleep paralysis demons that exist, the Alp tends to want to cause mischief in as many ways as possible. So it's not necessarily going to kill you or end your suffering anytime soon. It wants to keep the party going. Dream visits and nightmare manipulation are only part of what makes an Alp scary and annoying. It drinks blood from people's nipples and plays all sorts of heinous pranks, from spoiling milk to rediapering babies to tying up horses' tails into knots. These little gremlins are indeed the worst, and they can shapeshift too, so don't expect to just see a little goblin hopping around. It might be a little trickier than that. Don't count on reading Nilbog backwards to save your butt either. What a bag of fun they are. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Jormungand. This giant snake lives in the ocean surrounding Midgard. It is so large that it encompasses the entire world and then eats its own tail. As I previously mentioned, it's the sibling of Fenrir, which is kind of odd considering that one is a wolf and one is a snake, but hey, Loki definitely got around. Jormungand is famous for its rivalry with Thor. The two would engage in many legendary battles over the years. One of said tales has Thor fishing in the sea for the serpent. He snags it and starts pulling. As it gets closer to the surface, the giant Mir becomes terrified. He sees Jormungand dribbling blood and poison and decides to cut the line, sending the snake back down to the depths. Thor was not happy about this development. Later on, of course, the two meet during Ragnarok. One telltale sign that Ragnarok is coming is the violent unrest of the seas. This happens because our slippery pal here has released his tail from his mouth and begins to flop onto land. Once this happens, it will spit poison to fill half the earth. The snake and the god do battle, with Thor emerging victorious but then succumbing to poison. Lose-lose, fellas, that's not how we wanted this to go. Another fun fact about this gigantic serpent is that continental Germans used to attribute earthquakes to its movements, which is especially terrifying in context. Imagine you're a German peasant and an earthquake rolls through. Your house, rubble, your wife pancaked, your crops shaken, not stirred. And what explanation do you have? Oh, a snake bigger than anything you could ever imagine. Cool. Good. Glad to know that there's something just slithering around beneath us and could surface at any moment. Definitely not living the rest of my peasant life in crippling fear. And at number 1, we've got Balor. When your people have an eternal, mythological, supernaturally powerful enemy, life can be rough. Dealing with the leader of said eternal, mythological, supernatural group of entities can be really hard, and that's what Balor is. Leader of the Fomorians and a malevolent force beyond comprehension, this enormous eyeball has been described in myths and legends passed down from the first Celtic settlers. This demonic tribe constantly showed up, bringing the deadliest of natural forces along to cause doom and destruction all throughout Ireland. Plenty of battles were fought between these demons and the folks who just wanted to keep existing, but the deadliest of all is Balor. A gigantic fiend with strength beyond measure, Balor was a sight to behold. However, you didn't want to look directly at him. He had an enormous eyeball, rumored to be poisonous, that would turn the tide of any skirmish. It was so big, in fact, that it required a team of servants to manually open and close it. Anyone who he pointed said humongous eyeball at would perish, and this became a keystone weapon in the Fomorian arsenal. For ages, these demons dominated the Celtic settlers, forcing them back and preventing them from truly taking hold of the land. However, there was a prophecy that did not bode well for the demonic tribe. Apparently, his grandson would one day strike him down and dethrone the Fomorians in one decisive blow. This giant eye did everything that it could to prevent this from happening though. Hiding his daughter away to prevent her from ever bearing children, Balor was careful not to let any grandchildren make it onto the scene. However, a priestess managed to sneak a human hero into her quarters, and this man seduced the woman, resulting in triplets, only one of which survived. And wouldn't you know it, the surviving sibling grew up to be the heroic Lou Lamfada. Lou was an ace with the good old slingshot and managed to get his granddad right in the eye. Something about slingshots and giant eyeballs in mythology, eh? This bullseye was enough to down the legendary giant, forcing the rest of the Fomorians back into the sea, finally freeing the humans from years of terror. We haven't heard much from them since, so maybe they're waiting for another leader with a power as strong as the poisonous eye.
In at number 5, the Wendigo. Also known as the Wendigo or Witico, the Wendigo originates from Native American legend and is said to be a demonic half-beast as told by the Algonquin peoples along the Atlantic coast of the USA and Canada. The legend itself lends its name to the disputed modern medical term Wendigo psychosis, which is supposed to be a culture-bound disorder. To quote Basil Johnston, a teacher and scholar, the Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tauntly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash grey of death. Its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Unclean and suffering from separation of the flesh, the Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odour of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. The most common interpretation of the Wendigo is that it's a spirit that possesses a person after they resort to cannibalism, whether that be under dire circumstances or not, and turns them into a Wendigo. They are also said to have an endless craving for human flesh and are sometimes said to grow in proportion to the meals that they eat, so that they never get full. Wendigos are known to have superior speed and stealth, the ability to mimic human voices, near perfect hunting skills, and in some cases the ability to control the weather. They are also known to bring darkness before dusk. In at number 4 we have Dover Demon. Originating in Dover, Massachusetts, the Dover Demon is a small humanoid that was subject of an intensive scare during the 1970s. When multiple witnesses came forward reporting sightings across the area. This monster is described as looking like a grey alien, except that it has skin of a rosy orange coloration. It has a large head on a small body and oftentimes travels on all fours. Its eyes are said to glow, sometimes orange, sometimes green. The first sighting begins at 10:32 p.m. on April 12th, when Bill Bartlett, Mike Mazoka, and Andy Brody were driving north on Farm Street. Bartlett, who was driving, spotted something creepy along the side of the road. Think it was a dog or a cat, he thought nothing of it. That wasn't until his headlights illuminated the creature. The creature turned its head and looked at the group, his large head on his stick-thin body, and his eyes glowing an orange colour. Now skeptics claim that the Dover Demon is simply a lost baby moose, which has been glimpsed under unusual conditions, making it appear humanoid. However, people don't believe this explanation and point out that all sightings happen during the wrong time of year for a moose that small to exist. Coming in at 3, Titans. Hailing from Greek mythology, the Titans were the pre-Olympian gods. According to the Theogony of Hesiod, they were the 12 children of the primordial parents Uranus and his mother Gaia, with 6 male Titans, Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, Lapetus, and Cronus, and 6 female Titans called the Titanites. Cronus mated with his sister Rhea, and together they became the first generation of Olympians. Zeus and his 5 siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Descendants of the Titans are also called Titans. The Titans were also former gods, the generation of gods preceding the Olympians. They were ultimately overthrown as part of the Greek succession myth, which told how Cronus seized power from his father Uranus and ruled the cosmos with the Titans as his subordinates. Now Cronus and the Titans were in turn defeated and replaced as the ruling pantheon of gods by Zeus and the Olympians in a tenure referred to as the Titanomachy. As a result of the war, Cronus and the vanquished Titans were banished from the the upper world, being held imprisoned under guard in Tartarus, although according to history some of these titans were allowed to remain free. Coming in at 2, Peuchen. Hailing from Scottish folklore, the Peuchen or Peuchen is a monster or giant described by John Francis Campbell in popular tales of the West Highlands, as having a single eye in the middle of its face, a single hand protruding from its chest instead of arms, and a single leg emerging from its central axis. Not only that, but it has a single tuft of hair on the top of its head, which Campbell says, I quote, "It were easier to take a mountain from the root than to bend that tuft." Quite the tuft indeed. However, Campbell isn't the only writer to reference the giant. Douglas Hyde did so too in his collection of Irish folklore called Beside the Fires. I quote, "He held a very thick iron flay club in a skinny hand and 20 chains out of it, and 50 apples on each chain of them, and a great venomous spell on each great apple of them, and a girdle of the skins of deer and roebuck around the thing that was his body, and one eye in the forehead of his black-faced countenance, and one bare, hard, very hairy hand coming out of his chest, and one veiny, thick-soled leg supporting him, and a close, firm, dark blue mantle of twisted, hard, thick feathers protecting his body. And surely he was more like unto devil than to man." Now, though hailing from different countries, both descriptions seem to represent branches of a common Gaelic tradition. Finally, coming in at number 1, Caicus. Hailing from Roman mythology, Caicus, meaning bad, was a fire-breathing giant and the son of Vulcan. He was ultimately killed by Hercules after terrorizing the Aventine Hill before the founding of Rome. However, let's go back. Caicus lived in a cave in Italy on the future site of Rome. To survive, he feasted on the flesh of humans and would nail the heads of victims to the doors of his cave. Now, like I said, he would later be defeated by Hercules, and according to Evander, Hercules stopped to pasture the cattle he had stolen from Geryon near Caicus's lair. As Hercules slept, the giant took a liking to the cattle and stole 8 of them, 4 bulls and 4 cows, dragging them by their tails so as to leave a trail in the wrong direction. When Hercules awoke, the remaining cattle made suggestive noises towards the cave, so Hercules, now angry, stormed towards the cave, and a terrified Caicus blocked the entrance with a vast, immovable boulder, so Hercules quite literally tore off the top of the mountain to reach him. Caicus responded with spewing fire and smoke, while Hercules attacked with tree branches and rocks the size of millstones. Hercules eventually leapt into the cave, aiming for the area where the smoke was heaviest, and grabbed Caicus, strangling the monster to death. According to Virgil in Book 8 of the Aeneid, Hercules grasped Caicus so tightly that his eyes popped out and there was no blood left in his throat.
Number 5 on this list is El Chupacabra. You guys should know who El Chupacabra is by this point, considering we've talked about this creature tons on this channel before. Basically, it is a legendary creature in the Central Americas that's said to drink the blood of livestock. Although this creature seems like it's probably fake, it might be real, just not exactly how we might expect it to be. Carolyn Beccia says, "We are taught from an early age, don't approach scary looking dogs. And while no one can get a clear picture of Bigfoot, the Kraken, or the Loch Ness Monster, there is one monster that is oddly not camera shy, the legendary El Chupacabra. The Chupacabra was first sighted in Puerto Rico in the 70s. A wave of sightings followed in the late 1990s. During this time, livestock throughout Puerto Rico was found drained of blood. These Chupacabra, or goatsucker attacks, caused panic with local residents who claimed a vampire was feeding on their livestock. Although descriptions have varied, most describe a hairless, alien-like monster with spikes going down its back and glowing red eyes. It sounds dubious, but how could so many people be taking pictures of the same ugly dog-like creature? The answer may be one found in science. One plausible theory is that these creatures are coyotes suffering from sarcoptic mange, an inflammatory skin condition caused by the itch-inducing parasite mite scabies. Wolves, dogs, and coyotes infected with scabies will have extreme hair loss, skin shriveling, and constricted blood vessels that can lead to life-threatening fatigue. And while usually a coyote or wolf will have no problems hunting prey, once infected by sarcoptic mange, coyotes may choose to hunt more available meals such as livestock. So it's actually possible that this creature is real, it's just not what we thought at all. I know that this takes away from some of the mystery and lore around it, but ultimately this would make a lot of sense. When you think about it, what's more likely? A space alien comes crashing to Earth and starts sucking the blood of our livestock, or some coyotes get a disease and start doing it instead? I tend to side with the coyotes. Either way though, that doesn't make these coyotes nice or friendly or approachable. Still treat them like you would a chupacabra. With caution. Number 4 on this list is the Stymphalian birds. We gotta go all the way back to ancient Greece for this one. Caroline Beccius says, one of Hercules' labors was to kill the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds who had the peculiar habit of throwing dung. The Greeks were not the only ones who liked to scare their youngsters with killer bird tales. The Maori tribe of New Zealand told similar legends of the Pokeye or Haikoi, a giant black and white bird that swooped down from the sky to pick off small children. Scientists today know that these thunderbirds existed. Called Haast's eagle, the bird stood over 6 feet tall and had a wingspan of over 8 feet. The Haast eagle would sit atop trees and then ambush its prey by swooping down at 60-mile-per-hour speeds. Then it would disembowel its meal with sharp talons before the poor slob could even worry about dung throwing. Hercules would never have survived these hellbirds, but you can sleep well tonight. The Haast's eagle went extinct around the 15th century. Anything that could annihilate Hercules would definitely be a no-go for me, guys. That dude was literally a demigod, and if these guys could have beaten him, then we wouldn't have stood a chance. Lucky for us, they are extinct now, but for the people back then, they would have had their hands full with these creatures. If, of course, they still had hands and the beast hadn't ripped them off yet.
Number 3. The Kicking Monster. When Set Ahatsitali was born, his mother was so disgusted with him that she took him to a cliff where she put him in a hole which she covered with a stone. But he escaped and survived on the cliffside. He had no head, having only a long pointed end where it should have been. It had long, powerful legs and long hair that grew into the rock, anchoring him to the cliffside. He had several monstrous children of his own who would wait at the bottom of the cliff to be fed. The cliff was near an assortment of fruiting cacti, so many people would come by hoping to get something to eat. As they walked the cliffside, the creature would wait with his legs folded up until the passerby tried to pass in front of him. At that point, he would kick the traveler off the side, where they would tumble down to the bottom, where they would be ruthlessly devoured by the kicking monster's children. When Nyanesgani found him, he was prepared, and as he passed the strange creature, he was able to dodge its kick. The hero asked the creature why he was trying to kick him, and the monster insisted that it was just stretching its legs. It then tried to kick him 3 more times. There is some variation in the versions of this story that I found. In one, the hero is kicked off the cliff and loses his weapons, but is able to grab the monster by the hair and push him down the cliff while saving himself. In another, he dodges all the kicks, stabs the monster to death, cuts the anchoring hair, and sends him down the cliff where he is devoured by its hungry children, who the hero transformed into sheep, owls, turtles, or buzzards depending on the telling. Number 2. Yetso. With a name meaning big monster, you knew this one was going to be bad. Yetso was the most powerful and most feared of the Inai. As the son of a woman and a stone, he was covered with valuable rocks and minerals, with turquoise around his neck, white shell on his shoulder, an agate disc on his head, and scaly flint armor like knives covering most of his body. He had a basket of lightning bolts and was so large that each of his steps stretched as far as a man could walk from sunrise to noon. He had been hunting Nyanesgani and his twin brother Tobadzissani since they were infants, but thankfully the twins were well hidden by their mothers, who hid the kids and told the giants that their footprints had been made by her in an effort to not be so lonely. As adults, the twins went after the giant, finding him drinking a lake dry in 4 gulps, and being so large that his body was above both the eastern and southern hills. The twins were spotted by the giant, who began to taunt them. They returned his taunts and soon made him furious. The giant threw lightning at them, but they were able to easily dodge while riding on a rainbow. They hit him with lightning of their own, which caused his armor to shatter, and the giant collapsed dead onto the ground. The twins scalped the giant and threw the head to the east, where it became the Cabezon Peak. Knowing that if his blood reached any of the other monsters he would be revived, the twins dug trenches, which explains the ridges and cliffs of volcanic rock near Cabezon Peak today. The Dene used his scales to make armor, knives, and arrowheads. Number 1. Skinwalkers. Moving away from the Dene, we have the most infamous of the Dene legends, the Skinwalker. Legend says that they are Dene medicine men and women who became corrupted by their power, and have developed the ability to shapeshift into the form of an animal. They take the form of monstrous bears, wolves, and coyotes, among other predators. They are almost impossible to kill, save for with a white ash-covered bullet. In order to become a Skinwalker, one must be inducted by a secret society, with the initiation being the committing of an extremely evil deed, such as killing a sibling or other family member. Upon completion, they are granted their transformation powers and wear the skins of the animals they transform into, hence the name. Sometimes they are also described as wearing animal skulls or antlers on their heads. This is why the Dene consider it taboo to wear the pelts of predatory animals. Other powers include the ability to possess and control people. They are known to engage in acts such as grave robbing and cannibalism, just to name some of the more tame acts. This creature has transcended indigenous folklore and has managed to make its way into the mainstream lexicon, having appeared in novels by Stephen King, episodes of The X-Files, and several episodes of the television program Supernatural. Although many creatures from folklore across the world are capable of indescribable destruction, few are as disturbing or interesting as the creatures featured in the legends of the Dene tribe. We'd like to thank abookofcreatures.com for providing much of the information and images sourced for this video.
Coming in at 5, Garuda. Garuda is a legendary bird or bird-like creature in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain mythology. He is variously the vehicle mount of the Hindu god Vishnu, a Dharma protector and Astasena in Buddhism, and the yaksha of the Jain Tirthankara Shantinatha. It is described as a kind of bird and a kite-like figure. He is shown either in zoomorphic form or in anthropomorphic form. Garuda is generally a protector with power to swiftly go anywhere, ever watchful, and an enemy of the serpent. In Hinduism, Garuda is a divine eagle-like sunbird and the kind of birds. He is said to be a powerful creature in the epics whose wing flapping can stop the spinning of heaven, earth, and hell. He is also described to be the vehicle mount of the Hindu god Vishnu, as I previously mentioned, and typically they are shown together. Garuda's links to Vishnu, the Hindu god who fights injustice and destroys evil in his various avatars to preserve Dharma, had made him an iconic symbol of king's duty and power, an insignia of royalty or Dharma. His eagle-like form is shown either alone or with Vishnu, signifying divine approval of the power of the state. He is found on the faces of many early Hindu kingdom coins, with this symbolism either as a single-headed bird or a three-headed bird that watches all sides. Throughout the Mahabharata, Garuda is invoked as a symbol of impetuous violent force or speed and of martial prowess. Coming in at 4, Makara. Makara is a legendary sea creature in Hindu mythology. In Hindu astrology, Makara is equivalent to the zodiac sign Capricorn, which is my sign. Makara appears as the Vahana of the river goddess Ganga, Narmada, and of the sea god Varuna. Makara are considered guardians of gateways and thresholds, protecting throne rooms as well as entryways to temples. It is the most commonly recurring creature in Hindu and Buddhist temple iconography, and also frequently appears as a gargoyle or as a spout attached to a natural spring. It is generally depicted as half terrestrial animal in the frontal part and half aquatic animal in the hind part. Though Makara may take many different forms throughout Hindu culture, in the modern world its form is always related to the marsh crocodile or water monitor. Makara has been depicted typically as half mammal and half fish. In many temples the depiction is in the form of the half fish or seal with head of an elephant. It is also shown in an anthropomorphic with head and jaws of a crocodile, an elephant trunk with scales of fish, and a peacock tail. Lakshmi sitting on a lotus is also a depiction in which she pulls the tongue of the elephant-shaped Makara is meant to project Lakshmi's image as the goddess of prosperity, wealth, and well-being. It represents a necessary state of chaos before the emergence of a new state of order.
Number 3 on this list is the Kappa. Kappa are gross little creatures that can be very tricky and menacing. Gajanpaw says this small human-like creature has a shell like a turtle, green scaly skin, and a plate on its head that must be filled with water at all times to stay alive. They live in Japan's rivers, lakes, and other waterways. In Shintoism, Kappa are respected as gods of water, and statues of them can be sometimes found at shrines around Japan. Kappa quirks include having an affinity for cucumbers and never breaking a promise. In the urban legend version, a more menacing Kappa loves to pull lost children and animals into the water to drown and eat. They still like to eat cucumbers, but also raw human intestines. Cucumbers! Cool, love it. Human intestines, not so cool, don't love it. For any of our Pokemon fans out there, these little guys remind me a lot of the Pokemon Lombre, which would be really cute if they weren't trying to steal our children and animals and then also devour them. Now, it's unclear if these Kappa ever were humans at one point or if they're just a mythical animal. A lot of their characteristics are similar to humans, so it wouldn't surprise me if somehow these creatures evolved from humans, or maybe devolved in this case. Either way, human or not, these beasts may look cute on the outside, but they're not to be trifled with. Keep your kids and your pets close if you intend to take a stroll by some Japanese rivers anytime soon. Number 2 on this list is the Onro. Onro are not the sort of spirits that you want to be bringing to some sort of social gathering. Not only because they are super dangerous and could literally kill you, but honestly, they're just a major buzzkill. The word Onryo translates to vengeful spirit or wrathful spirit, and in folklore and legend, that's pretty much exactly what they are. Vengeful spirits who have returned to the world of the living with the goal of causing harm to those who wronged them when they were living. These spirits have the power to manipulate things in our physical world, and I'm not just talking about opening a door or something small like that. They can fully change the weather and cause natural disasters to hit entire cities. This is extremely scary because if an entire city, let's say, wronged this spirit while they were alive, then they're going to exact their revenge on that entire city. Now, a lot of times these spirits are portrayed as women with jet black hair and a very pale and almost deathly complexion. It doesn't have to be women though. That's just simply how the media has shown them to be up until this point. A male Onryo could be just as likely if that spirit is holding on to some serious trauma from their life in the living. Usually people who have been murdered or had their entire lives ruined due to the selfishness of others will become Onryo. It's a lesson to all people that are living to be kind to those around you, not only just because that it's the right thing to do, but also because having an Onryo come after you isn't the best idea. And number 1 on this list is the Gashadokuro. So this mythical being is really not something that you'd want to run into. Gajinpal writes, the poor unfortunate bones of those who perished on the battlefield turn into the Gashadokuro. These yokai form in places where masses of normal skeletons lie, such as in villages after famine or disease has wiped out the population. Because they died without a proper burial or funeral rites, the souls and bones come together and create one giant skeleton 15 times the size of an average person. The skeleton specters feed on lone travelers, biting their heads off, feasting on their bones, and drinking their blood. Dracula style, guys. It's like some sort of boss from Castlevania. And it truly does feel like a boss in a video game or television show. A 15-foot tall giant skeleton that's been made from the dead bodies of the soldiers who perished here. Like, really think about how horribly terrifying a creature like this would be. You would also have no possible chance of winning in a battle against it, because how can you kill something that's already dead? Yokai says the earliest record of a Gashadokuro goes back over 1,000 years to a bloody rebellion against the central government by a samurai named Tera no Masakado. His daughter Takayasha Hime was a famous sorceress. When Masako was eventually killed for his revolt, his daughter continued his cause. Using her black magic, she summoned a great skeleton from the bodies of dead soldiers to attack the city of Kyoto. If this beast of a creature can take on an entire city by itself, then I definitely don't want to be running into it by my lonesome.
Number 5 on this list is the El Culebron. I'd never heard of this legend before, and I have to admit that it's pretty cool. This creature is native to Chile, and although it'd be pretty neat to look at from afar, it's definitely very dangerous. Scoop Whoop says El Culebron is basically an enormous hairy snake with a gigantic calf-like head. It's said that the creature resides inside of dark caves or remote forests, and it eats basically anything in its path. Legend also has it that the snake can draw wealth to anyone who's able to domesticate it, but trapping a Culebron is no easy feat. You have to find one in the wild, pluck 3 of its longest hair strands without getting eaten, and then put it in a bowl of milk. From that bowl, 3 baby Culebron will spring to life, and the strongest will eat the other 2 and become a full-fledged Culebron. From that point forward, owners have to maintain the snakes with sacrifices of animals or close relatives and leave the blood in a secret location that only the snake knows of. A very unique legend, if you ask me. A very deadly, giant snake creature that has the ability to bring you great wealth, but only if you can breed one and domesticate it.
The story that I read off doesn't go into deep detail on how they actually bring you wealth, which would definitely be of interest to me. Maybe they're kind of like truffle sniffing pigs, except instead of truffles they can smell gold or rare gems or something like that. Probably the reason that we don't know for sure how they bring us wealth is because so few have actually been able to be domesticated. First off, finding one of these creatures would be very hard because it means you'd need to trek through the jungles and mountains of Chile. Then, after finding one of the rarest creatures in the world, you also need to fight one of the most deadly creatures in the world and pluck 3 hair strands off of it. Then you need to fully domesticate another one of these beasts in your home after you grow it from a bowl of milk. There is a lot of room for error here, guys, and I doubt that many people have been able to complete all of the steps. Keep an eye out though for the El Culebron if you find yourself in Chile. Number 4 on this list is La Llorona. La Llorona is also known to many as the Weeping Woman. She is the ghostly apparition of a vengeful spirit who roams around by the water bemoaning the loss of her children whom she'd actually drowned herself. Scoop Whoop writes, according to a popular version of the tale, the Weeping Woman was once a beautiful maiden named Maria. She married a nobleman and gave birth to 2 sons. Her husband was a traveler and he rarely visited home. During their time apart, his feelings for her began to dull, but her husband still loved his sons and gave them all the attention that he left his wife bereft of. Once when he was in town, she caught him with a younger woman. Enraged, she took her sons to Santa Fe River and drowned them. She also was found dead on the riverbank a few days later, the cause of which remained unknown. It's said that when she reached heaven, she was denied entry until she found the souls of her sons. Thus, she wanders the earth looking to reclaim their souls. Dressed in a white gown and mourning for her sons, La Llorona takes lost and abandoned children and drowns them in hopes of recovering souls that will allow her entry into the afterlife. What an absolutely horrible woman. Clearly killing her own children really didn't teach her anything at all, because now she's out there killing other people's children. This is a really scary legend in Mexico, and it's often why parents don't let their children go to areas with water by themselves. There's also the fear that La Llorona will be lurking somewhere around there thinking that she can use the souls of the young children instead of her own. You'd think that she would have realized by now that faking the souls of other people to get into heaven isn't gonna work, but by the sounds of it, she really doesn't sound like the brightest bulb in the bunch. Bright or not, she's still very dangerous, so be very careful whenever you're around water in Latin America.
In at number 3 we have Baba Yaga. Hailing from Slavic folklore, the Baba Yaga is a supernatural being or witch that takes on the form of an old hideous woman. In some stories she is said to fly around in a mortar, wielding a pestle and dwelling deep in the forest inside a hut that is said to stand on chicken legs. Baba Yaga has become one of the most memorable and distinctive figures in European folklore. In certain stories it is said that Baba Yaga may help or hinder those who encounter her or seek her out. In others she is known to kidnap children, threatening to eat them. In fact, many tales of witches living in houses made of candy or cake were named Baba Yaga. In some stories, heroes would venture into the wilderness to seek out help of Baba Yaga, asking for her advice or assistance in completing a quest. Sometimes she played the role of an antagonist, while other times she was a source of guidance. No matter the story, she always drives a hard bargain and will set out her conditions in terms of the agreement. All of her verbal contracts allow her the right to eat anyone who was later unable or unwilling to fulfill their end of the deal. Coming in at number 2, Dullahan. The Dullahan, also known as the Headless Horseman, is a type of fae originating from Irish folklore. It is said that this sinister being appears as either a man or a woman riding atop a black horse, but the rider has no head upon their shoulders. Instead, it is carried under their arm. It is also said that the head appears dead and rotten, with a demonic grin spread across its face from ear to ear. The Dullahan is also known to carry a whip made from a human spine, and sometimes pulls a wagon which is adorned with funeral objects. According to legend, around midnight on certain Irish festivals or feast days, the Dullahan may be observed riding a dark and snorting steed across the countryside. Storyteller from the Mourne Mountains once recounted his experience with the monster, stating, "I seen the Dullahan myself stepping on the brow of the hill between the Bryansford and Moneyscalp late one evening, just as the sun was setting. It was completely headless, but it held up its own head in its hand, and I heard it call out a name. I put my hands across my ears in case the name was my own, so I couldn't hear what it said. When I looked again, it was was gone, but shortly afterwards there was a bad car accident on that very hill, and a young man was killed. It had been his name that the Dullahan was calling. Now it is said when the Dullahan stops riding, that is where a person is due to die, and when a Dullahan calls out the person's name, the person immediately perishes. There is no way to block the road against a Dullahan, all locks and gates open to them when they approach. They are however frightened of gold, and even a single gold pin can drive a Dullahan away. And finally, coming in at number 1 we have Teki Teki. Hailing from Japan, Teki Teki is a malevolent ghost/demon similar to that of the infamous Kuchisaka Onna, or the slit-mouthed woman. Teki Teki was originally a human who was bullied and in some stories assaulted, resulting in her jumping off a train platform onto the tracks and getting cut in half by the oncoming train. It is said that she barely survived due to the cold weather, with her crawling to a person for help. But instead of aiding her, they left her to die. Now Teki Teki's vengeful spirit stalks the streets of Japan. She often lurks in urban areas and around train stations at night. Since she no longer has a lower half, she travels on either her hands or elbows, dragging her upper torso and making a scratching Teki Teki like sound. According to legend, if she encounters an individual, she will chase them and slice them in half, killing them in such a way that mimics her own disfigurement. One particular legend goes as follows. As a young schoolboy was walking home at night, he spotted a beautiful young girl standing by a windowsill resting on her elbows. They smiled at each other for a moment. The boy wondered what a girl was doing in an all-boys school, but before he could wonder more about the girl, she jumped out the window and revealed her lower half was missing. Frightened, he stood on the sidewalk, but before he could run, she caught up to his location quickly and cut the boy in half. Sucks to be him. In at number 5 we have Ong Ba Bi. The Ong Ba Bi is considered to be the Vietnamese version of the boogeyman and is said to have originated in the 17th century. The story of the boogeyman is told throughout the world in many different ways, but in Vietnam is the Ong Ba Bi that brings fear to children, and parents use it to scare their children into behaving. Many parents in Vietnam threaten their children saying things like "stop crying" or "Ong Ba Bi will come and take you," or "eat your broccoli or I'll call Ong Ba Bi." The boogeyman in general doesn't have any specific appearance, and conceptions vary drastically by household and culture. But the Ong Ba Bi is described as an old, rugged man carrying 3 sacks, has 12 eyes, and he likes to kidnap naughty children using and putting them into his sack. When looking at the personality traits of the boogeyman, they are divided into 3 categories. One being the kind that punishes misbehaved children, the kind that are more prone to violence, and the kind that protect the innocent. They all relate in the same way, being that they all exist to teach young children lessons. And that's why the boogeyman is directly related to Ong Ba Bi, because they are both there to frighten children with punishment and to steal them at night and sometimes even eat them. The Ong Ba Bi only ever comes at night and only kidnaps the children who are misbehaving and not listening to their parents. This so-called mythical creature is said to be invented by parents in order to scare children when they are disobedient and scaring them into having good behavior. Another account says that it was invented based on events happening in the 17th century when starvation ran rapid through Vietnam, and it drove many people into kidnapping children to sell for food, and the Ong Ba Bi is based on those events. Whichever the case, many know these tales regardless of where you're from, and the story of Ong Ba Bi is told by parents to children to this day and is a very fearsome figure to children in Vietnam. Coming in at number 4 we have Ma Da. Children living in areas close to the river are warned about Ma Da, which are vengeful spirits who lurk in bodies of water. They're believed to be the souls of drowned victims that tend to have a childlike appearance, and they manifest as bloated corpses with weeds for hair. It's believed these souls died in torment and they cannot find peace and can only be reincarnated if there is another to take their place. The Ma Da roam in lakes and rivers waiting to drag down unsuspecting swimmers, but it's believed that this is most likely made up to warn children to not go swimming unsupervised, because many fatal water-related accidents are very common in Vietnam. Many happenings and stories of the Ma Da come from the infamous Tu Lich, otherwise known as the Cursed River. Back in September 2001, while working to take out some of the excessive mud and trash build-up in the river, a construction team uncovered several wooden piles arranged in a strange formation, including ceramic relics, metal utensils, and even bones from human skeletons. The odd occurrence even made headlines on many different newspapers at the time, but had eventually died down. Several years later, in 2007, the happenings came up again when Mr. Nijin Hung Kwang, the leader of the construction team, recounting many misfortunes that had happened to him, and others who were related to the project since 2001. Some of the things that happened to these men included experiencing nightmares in which they were haunted by ghosts, feelings of being drowned, as well as health issues such as epileptic seizures and other accidents happening to the men's families. Mr. Nunjian even invited a monk to perform a ritual to lift the curse on the river, but the attempt was unsuccessful, and the monk died shortly after visiting.
Number 3 on this list is the Kraken. We have one of the most famous folklore creatures here, guys, that, as we know now, turned out to be real. The Kraken was especially big in Norse culture. All of those people up there in the Nordic regions feared this wicked beast, as it was said to be able to pull down entire ships with hundreds of men on board. Instances where exactly that happened did actually transpire. Ships with tons of people on them that were literally made for battle would be out on the water, and then boom, Kraken attack and they're toasted. Except it wasn't really the Kraken now, was it? The Kraken looks very similar to an actual animal that we have in our world that is also super deadly and really strong. The giant squid. Giant squids, in case you couldn't tell from the name, are giant. They're pretty big. They are so big actually they would have had the capability to take down an old ship like this. In fact, we've even seen these beasts do some serious damage to submarines, and they're made of metal. They easily could have sunk a wooden boat from hundreds or thousands of years ago. And if you were a sailor on said wooden boat and you saw this massive creature with several tentacles sucking you to the bottom of the ocean, then you would probably exaggerate what happened as well too. It's very easy to see how the legend of the Kraken got started and started to snowball as more encounters with the giant squid happened. I'm glad that the Kraken isn't technically real, because the giant squid is already bad enough. Number 2 on this list is the Charybdis. What was initially thought to be a folkloric creature may have been real, but not exactly in the way that we might think. Caroline Beccius says, "Nothing is more frightening than being sucked underwater by a whirlpool that feeds on human flesh 3 times a day." The Charybdis first appeared in Homer's Odyssey. During this epic tale, Odysseus must sail between the 6-headed sea monster Scylla and the flesh-eating whirlpool Charybdis. These 2 dueling sea monsters attacked in intervals, much like a whirlpool's regular intervals of tidal activity. It sounds terrifying, but whirlpools that pull ships underwater really do happen. Known today as Garofalo, one is found in the strait between Italy's mainland and Sicily. Garofalo occurs when winds blow across the strait in opposition to the tides. This makes it technically not a whirlpool because there's no circular motion, but it does have the ability to wreak havoc on ships and pull humans into a watery grave. So this deadly creature was real, it just ended up not being a creature at all. Back in the times when these stories were written, there would have been many folklore legends about evil sea monsters that could pull brave sailors into the sea. The reality of the situation is though that the ships we had back then kinda sucked, and it was a lot easier for the weather and other conditions to sink the ships. That's why there were so many legends of monsters coming from the ocean for so long. Finally, number 1 on this list is the incubus demon. This demon is an evil demon who is thought to sneak into your home and have sexual relations with you as you're sleeping. This creature is real in a sense. It just so happens that it's actually in our minds. During the witch hunt craze of the 16th and 17th century, people had some really messed up ideas on how human reproduction occurred. One way was for a demon to steal a man's seed and impregnate a helpless woman during her sleep. The monster that stole the precious sperm was called a succubus, and the monster that implanted the sperm was called an incubus. The incubus would sit on top of your chest while you slept, making it impossible for you to move if you woke. Sort of like being assaulted by a possessed sexomniac. But before you condemn medieval people as crazed horn dogs trying to attack innocent women, there is a scientific basis for believing in such monsters. The condition is called sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, you are fully awake but cannot move or cry for help. It feels like you've had a stroke, but although it's terrifying, sleep paralysis is harmless. Most sleep experts attribute it to being caught between REM, rapid eye movement, and NREM, non-rapid eye movement sleep. Either way, before sleep stages were understood, we can see how our ancestors would have thought it was a demon sitting on your chest. So literally this demon creature that apparently attacked people was never real at all, it just felt extremely real from our minds. I've experienced sleep paralysis before, and although I didn't experience any demon thing, I can 100% see how people would have believed this back then. It could definitely have felt like that and would have got people on the lookout for this sick and twisted demon of the night.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Black Shuck. This unbelievable creature is no fairy dog, that's for sure, although those aren't anything to laugh about either. This is the true terror dog, the brutal big bad boy. the canine carnivore fueled by carnage, a hate-eyed and vengeful black dog full of rage and malice. There are all sorts of variants based on where you are, from the Gargas to the Gytrash to the Padfoot, but the one best known could be the Black Shuck. Take one look, and you're out of luck. Some say that this thing is the embodiment of Satan. Wherever it goes, destruction follows. A harbinger of doom with blazing red eyes. If you see one, you're supposed to hide or make sure not to look at it. If you neglect to avert your gaze, your luck will get so bad that you will die within the year. There's one tale of a Suffolk church that tells of a Black Shuck visit back in 1577. The enormous dog came running in, killed the man and boy, and caused the steeple to collapse through the roof. Then it left in a hurry, leaving dark scorch marks on the door. And that was just one little tale. Even if you are a dog person, you don't want to run into one of these. Something tells me a treat won't smooth things over. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Tsuchigumo. Monsters have been mashed for as long as we can remember, and it's not always a graveyard smash, mind you. Sometimes it's the combination of many real, living creatures to make something extra nightmarish. This is a beast with the body of a tiger, the limbs of a spider, and the face of a demon. Part real mammal, part real, albeit much smaller arachnid, and part mythical monster. Apparently Tsuchigumo were known for eating travelers as they made their way across the countryside. In the remote fields, no one can hear you scream. 1 or 2 traveling morsels wouldn't be enough for them either. In one tale, a powerful warrior took one down and sliced it open, you know, to loot the body. This ancient hero was playing Dungeons and Dragons way before anyone else, setting the stage for countless boss encounters. This thing definitely reeks of big bad guy, although I don't know what kind of DM would unleash such a presence on Earth. Back to the story though. Inside the Tsuchigumo were 1,990 skulls, 10 shy of 2,000. Unbelievable, thought it would eat so many and barely even digest the skulls. It's a little wasteful if you ask me.
Coming in at 3, Gandabarunda. The Gandabarunda or Barunda is a 2-headed bird in Hindu mythology, believed to possess immense magical strength. It was the emblem of the erstwhile kingdom of Mysore under the Wadiyah kings, and after India attained independence, it was retained the Mysore state as its emblem. The bird is generally depicted as clutching elephants in its talons and beaks, demonstrating its immense strength. In the Chenakashova temple of Belur, Karnataka, Gandabarunda, the two-faced bird, is carved as a scene of chain of destruction in which a deer becomes prey to a big python, which in turn is lifted by an elephant. A lion attacks the elephant and the lion itself is devoured by Gandabarunda. The Gandabarunda was later identified as a physical form displayed by Narasimha, man-lion incarnation of Lord Vishnu. After Lord Narasimha had slain the demon Hiranyakashipu, he clung on to his dreadful form. The Devas were even more afraid of Lord Vishnu than they were of the demon. In order to protect the entire creation, Lord Shiva incarnated as Sharaba, a part lion and part bird beast. This further angered Lord Narasimha, who took the form of Lord Gandabarunda, who fought Sharaba for 18 days and held him between his 2 beaks and ripped him apart, thus killing him. Coming in at number 2, Ahai of Vritra. Vritra is a Vedic serpent or dragon in Hinduism, the personification of drought and adversary of Indra. Also identified as Asura, Vritra was also known in the Vedas as Ahai. He appears as a dragon blocking the course of the rivers and is heroically slain by Indra. According to the Rig Veda, Vritra kept the waters of the world captive until he was killed by Indra, who destroyed all the 99 fortresses of Vritra before liberating the imprisoned rivers. The combat began soon after Indra was born, and he had drunk a large volume of soma at Vashtri's house to empower him before facing Vritra. Vashtis fashioned the thunderbolts for Indra and Vishnu when asked to do so by Indra, made space for the battle by taking the 3 great strides for which Vishnu became famous. Vritra broke Indra's 2 jaws during the battle, but was then thrown by Indra, and in falling crushed fortresses that had already been shattered. Indra became known as Vrtranan, meaning slayer of Vritra. However, the story changes in Puranic and later versions. As told in the narration given to King Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, Vritra was a demon created by artisan god Vashta to avenge the killing of his son by Indra. Vritra won the battle and swallowed Indra, but the other gods forced him to vomit Indra out. The battle continued and Indra was eventually forced to flee. Vishnu and the sages then brokered a truce, with Indra swearing that he would not attack Vritra with anything made of metal, wood or stone, nor anything that was dry or wet, or during the day or the night. Indra instead used the foam from the waves of the ocean to kill him at twilight. Sneaky sneaky. And finally coming in at number 1, Sharaba. Sharaba or Saraba is a part lion and part bird beast in Hindu mythology who, according to Sanskrit literature, is 8-legged and more powerful than a lion or an elephant, possessing the ability to clear a valley in just one jump. In Sanskrit literature, Shiraba is initially described as an animal that roared and scared other animals in the hills and forest areas. In the great epic Mahabharata, this form of Shiraba was defined as a lion-slaying monster with 8 legs, eyes on the top, living in the forest and which ate raw flesh. It is also mentioned as residing on Mount Kuruncha, but not as a monster, but as an ordinary beast along with lions and tigers. Shiraba appears primarily as the incarnation of Lord Shiva, as a name of a monkey king in the epic Ramayana, also as a proper name of heroes and serpent Najas, and one of the names of god Vishnu as well as Buddha. In Puranic literature, Shiraba is associated with the god Shiva, who incarnates to subdue fierce manifestations of Vishnu. The man-lion form of Vishnu brings about the rivalry between the devotees of Vishnu and those of Shiva. Shiraba is portrayed with 2 heads, 2 wings, 8 legs of a lion with sharp claws and a long tail. Shiraba is also described as black in colour with 4 feet downward and 4 feet uplifted, with an enormous body. It also had a long face and nose, nails, 8 legs, 8 tusks, a cluster of mane, and a long tail. It jumped high repeatedly, making a loud cry.